All right, so today we're diving into the world of ECMO, with a bit of a twist.
Okay.
You know how we always hear about ECMO in the news? Like it's these amazing stories about survival and all.
Right.
Well, today we're going a little bit beyond that. We're going to be exploring what happens next.
Yeah, exactly. We're so used to kind of hearing about those immediate outcomes, though, that relief that someone's pulled through.
Right.
But what about those weeks and months and even years afterwards?
Right.
When they're off the machine and really facing that long road of recovery.
Yeah, and that's exactly where this deep dive begins. We're looking at the aftermath of ECMO Beyond Survival, an article by Jonathan Young, who's an ECMO specialist himself, published on LinkedIn just last month. And I think the really interesting thing here is he didn't just stick to like the usual medical journals. He actually immersed himself in online ECMO survivor groups.
Wow.
To understand what this recovery is really like.
That's fascinating. It's interesting because even within healthcare, sometimes there can be this little bit of a disconnect between, the saving of a life and then what that journey actually looks like for someone when they leave the hospital.
It's like the difference between, looking at a mountain from afar and then actually climbing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for this author, it seems like that difference really hit him in an unexpected way. He talks about being on vacation in Japan and Vietnam, no less.
Wow.
And still finding himself completely drawn to these survivor stories. Like he couldn't shake their impact even on vacation.
That's pretty powerful. You mentioned that he couldn't shake those stories even on vacation. What do you think it was about those experiences that really stuck with him? Was it like the raw honesty, the unexpected challenges, or was it something else entirely?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard to pinpoint from the article, but it seems like there were some common threads that he noticed.
Okay.
Things like the physical struggles, the emotional roller coaster, and just this feeling of almost being thrust back into a world that felt unfamiliar.
Wow.
And remember, ECMO is often used in these really, really intense life or death situations.
Yay.
So for many survivors, it's not just about physical recovery, but it's almost like rediscovering who they are and where they belong in the world now.
It's like they've gone through this life-altering experience, and meanwhile, the world just keeps spinning, expecting them to just jump right back in.
Exactly.
That must be so disorienting.
Absolutely. And this is actually where the author's personal experiences add a whole other layer to his exploration of aftercare.
Okay.
He actually opens up in the article about losing his father to suicide.
Oh, wow.
And how crucial support groups were in his own grieving process.
That's incredibly brave of him to share such a personal story.
It really is. And, I think it speaks volumes about how committed he is to really understanding this full spectrum of recovery.
Right.
And, it's possible that this personal connection is what fueled his desire to really dig deep into the long-term impact of ECMO, including the physical toll that it can take.
Yeah.
Which he definitely doesn't shy away from in this article.
And he does not sugarcoat it when he talks about the physical impact. He shares a couple of survivor stories that really highlight this point. I mean, one person talks about having multiple strokes and nerve damage as a result of their treatment,
right,
leading to, ongoing physical challenges.
And remember, these aren't just like, temporary discomforts or side effects that fade away.
Yeah.
We're talking about things that can have a very real impact on someone's day-to-day life.
Right.
And then he shares another story, even more stark, about a patient who needed ECMO while they were waiting for a heart transplant.
Okay.
And they actually ended up paralyzed from the waist down, even after a successful transplant.
Wow. That's heartbreaking.
It is.
And it really underscores that ECMO, while it's life-saving, it's not without its risks. It's a powerful intervention, but it can have lasting consequences.
Absolutely. And what we have to remember is that these physical scars are really only part of the story. What we don't always see are the unseen scars, the psychological and emotional toll that ECMO can take on a person.
It's true. We can't forget about the mental and emotional side of this. And he actually shares a story in the article about this survivor who needed ECMO after they had complications from what was supposed to be a routine surgery.
Oh, wow.
And now they live with this constant fear of respiratory infections.
Yeah. I mean, that makes total sense when you think about it. Like, imagine the anxiety of worrying that just a common cold could turn into something really serious.
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that, those psychological scars, they can stick around long after the physical ones have healed.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how common these feelings are for ECMO survivors, like the anxiety, the fear. He even seems to draw a connection between those experiences and PTSD.
He does. And it's understandable when you think about what these patients go through. I mean, you've got invasive procedures, the uncertainty of whether or not they're going to survive the long hospital stays.
Right.
It's a lot. It's no wonder that ECMO can be really traumatic for people.
Absolutely. And that ties into, I think, his biggest point, which is that support for ECMO survivors shouldn't stop when they leave the hospital.
All right.
He makes this case for, free and accessible support for all survivors, which is a great goal. But I'm curious, what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think that's where it gets really interesting because we have to think about what would actually be most helpful for someone in that situation.
Right.
Like if you put yourself in their shoes, what would you need?
Yeah.
And it's multifaceted, right? Like counseling would definitely be huge, being able to process everything.
To have that space to unpack it all.
Exactly. And then having peer support groups where survivors can connect with others who really get it.
It's that shared experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and then of course you can't forget about the financial burden that this can put on people.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge part of it.
Right. So, having some kind of financial aid to help with medical bills or even job loss, that could make a huge difference.
Yeah, you're hitting on something really important there because it's not just the medical bills themselves. It's the lost income from potentially not being able to work. It's the cost of ongoing care.
Yeah.
Even adapting their homes or lifestyles to accommodate any, new challenges they might be facing.
It's true. It's like this ripple effect.
It is.
And while we do have systems in place to address some of these needs, it sounds like he's really advocating for a more holistic approach to that post-ECMO care.
He is. And one of the things that he specifically calls for is greater involvement from healthcare professionals in online support groups.
Oh, interesting.
Which I thought was fascinating. It's not about, doctors just popping in to give medical advice or anything like that, but just being present, listening, learning from the experiences that are being shared in these online spaces.
That's such a good point. Because it really could be a way to bridge that gap we were talking about earlier.
Truly.
The one between the medical expertise and the reality of living with this condition.
Exactly.
So having healthcare providers in those online communities, I think, could lead to much more empathetic and effective care overall.
Yeah, because they're hearing it firsthand.
Exactly.
And it's not just, anecdotal. It's a wide range of experiences.
Exactly.
And what really struck me as inspiring was that he's not just talking about it theoretically. He actually talks in the article about wanting to create resources.
Oh, wow.
Potentially even multilingual support groups when he returns to the U.S.
That's amazing.
It is. It's one thing to raise awareness, but it's another thing entirely to actually roll up your sleeves and do the work.
Absolutely. And the fact that he specifically mentions wanting to collaborate with other professionals and researchers, it really speaks to this, I think, larger shift that we're seeing towards a more collaborative and patient-centered approach to healthcare.
For sure. It's like he's saying, look, let's stop waiting for someone else to fix this and just start building the support system that these survivors need.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah, it's really inspiring, and it makes me hopeful about, the future of ECMO care.
Totally. And it makes you wonder about the role that these online spaces could play in making that vision a reality.
Oh, yeah.
Like, could these virtual support groups actually become a formal part of the care plan for ECMO patients?
It's an interesting thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
Imagine, alongside medication and physical therapy, patients are also prescribed participation in these online support groups.
Wow.
That are specifically tailored to, their needs and what they're going through.
It's giving them the tools to connect with others who truly understand what they're going through, to share their own coping mechanisms, to find strength in those experiences.
Absolutely. And for the healthcare providers, it's also huge because they're getting these insights into what their patients are dealing with long after they've left the hospital.
It's invaluable information.
It is.
And, it makes you wonder, why stop at ECMO? This model of integrating online support into recovery plans, I mean, this could be beneficial for so many other medical procedures as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
It speaks to a larger shift, I think, in healthcare towards just being more patient-centered, right? Recognizing that recovery isn't just about the physical healing.
Right.
It's about the emotional and the psychological impact as well.
Absolutely. And it's about empowering those patients to connect and share their stories and really build those communities of support that are so essential for healing.
Yes, exactly.
Which brings us back to you, our listener. You sent us this article because clearly something about this topic resonated with you. Maybe you have a personal connection to ECMO, or maybe you're just drawn to these stories of resilience and recovery. Whatever it is, we wanted to leave you with one final thought, something to kind of ponder.
Okay.
Imagine a world where online support groups specifically tailored to people's medical journeys are just as commonplace as recommending, physical therapy or dietary changes after a hospital stay.
That would be incredible.
Oh, it would be amazing. What kind of impact do you think that would have not only on individual recovery, but also on the way we view healthcare as a whole?
It's a really powerful question. And for any of our listeners out there who are personally touched by ECMO, whether you're a survivor, a loved one, or even a medical professional,
Right.
we encourage you to check out the resources mentioned in the article.
We'll be sure to link to those in the show notes.
Sometimes just knowing that you're not alone in this can be the most powerful medicine of all.
So true. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.